He left to protect her. Years later, he returned to the bakery where their story had quietly begun. The sky over Seoul was a muted blend of orange and gray as the city settled into the evening. Beneath the skyline, the streets remained alive with their usual rhythm. Vendors calling out prices, office workers hurrying home, headlights cutting through the dimming light. Kang Ji-ho moved through the crowd with quiet purpose, his mind elsewhere, his gaze fixed on something distant. Once, his name had meant something in the world of corporate finance. He had built a reputation, gained influence, and climbed higher than most dared. Then, as quickly as he had risen, he had fallen. Betrayal had come from within, and the weight of it had pushed him into exile from the life he had known. Now, he walked these familiar streets, no longer the man he had been, unsure of what remained. Seoul had always been the city of his ambition, its towering buildings, once symbols of everything he had wanted. Now they loomed over him like silent witnesses to his failure. He had spent years playing the game, making decisions that had once seemed necessary, but looking back, he wondered when the line between victory and destruction had blurred. His fall had not been sudden. The cracks had been forming for years, small betrayals that he had ignored. The weight of his own choices pressing down on him. By the time he had realized, the damage had already been done. A gust of wind carried the scent of freshly baked bread, pulling Ji-ho from his thoughts. He turned his head, his gaze settling on a small bakery nestled between larger storefronts. The sign above the door was simple, almost unremarkable, but the warm light spilling from within gave it an inviting glow. His feet moved before he could think, drawn toward something familiar yet distant. Inside, Yoon Sora moved efficiently behind the counter, the scent of warm dough and sugar clinging to her like a second skin. The shop had once been her father's, built from the ground up with careful hands and quiet determination. When he had fallen ill, she had taken on the responsibility without hesitation, trading in youthful dreams for stability. The days had become predictable, shaped by the rhythm of kneading dough, setting timers, and greeting customers with a practiced smile. It was not the life she had imagined, but it was hers. She wiped her hands on a cloth, glancing toward the door as a customer entered. For a moment, her breath caught. Ji-ho stood just beyond the threshold, his presence unexpected, yet strangely inevitable. Time had stretched between them, turning childhood familiarity into something distant. He had been a part of her past, a boy who had once whispered secrets beneath a ginkgo tree, promising a future neither of them had truly understood. Then he had left, and she had remained, watching the seasons change without him. Ji-ho did not step inside. He lingered, his gaze sweeping across the small space before landing on her. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something else. Hesitation, perhaps. Sora held his gaze for a second longer before turning away, busying herself with the trays of bread cooling on the counter. The moment passed, and when she looked up again, he was gone. The city moved forward as it always did. Sora continued her quiet routine, waking before dawn, working until her limbs ached, finding solace in the familiar weight of flour and sugar. Ji-ho, meanwhile, wandered through streets that had once felt like home but now seemed foreign. He visited places he had not seen in years, passing by old haunts where memories lingered like ghosts. The past felt closer than ever, pressing against him in a way he could not ignore. It was a week later when the rain came. The downpour was sudden, drenching the streets in seconds, sending pedestrians rushing for cover. Sora found herself caught without an umbrella, pressed against the side of a convenience store as she watched the rain turn the pavement into a mirror. Then, through the blur of water and neon lights, Ji-ho appeared again. He had not changed much, yet there was something different in the way he carried himself, as if the weight on his shoulders had finally settled, rather than crushed him. For a long moment, neither moved. The rain continued falling, the city indifferent to their quiet reunion. Then Ji-ho stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate. He did not speak, and Sora did not ask why he was there. Instead, they stood together beneath the awning, two people bound by a past neither had expected to collide with again. The days that followed were marked by subtle shifts. Ji-ho found himself drawn to the bakery, the scent of warm bread and the quiet hum of Sora's work grounding him in ways he did not fully understand. He would stand by the window, watching as she moved with practiced ease, her hands shaping dough as if the world beyond the shop did not exist. She never acknowledged him directly, but he knew she was aware of his presence. Sora, for her part, did not ask him why he lingered. She had learned long ago that some things did not need to be spoken. Jiho was a man searching for something, though she doubted he even knew what. Perhaps it was comfort, or familiarity, or the need to hold on to something real after everything else had been taken from him. Whatever it was, she let him stay. But the world was not kind to those who tried to outrun their past. Jiho's name still carried weight, though not the kind he wished. Rumors followed him, whispers of scandal and betrayal, remnants of a world he had tried to leave behind. It did not take long for those whispers to reach the bakery's door. Customers hesitated. Eyes lingered too long. The quiet sanctuary Sora had built was no longer untouched by the outside world. Jiho saw the change before she ever spoke of it. He had spent years reading people, understanding the small shifts that signaled trouble. He recognized the way Sora's shoulders tensed, the way her smiles became less frequent, the way she avoided meeting his gaze for too long. He had always been the cause of chaos, and now, even in his attempt at silence, he had brought it to her doorstep. Sora had spent a lifetime avoiding complications. She had learned to live within the boundaries of what she could control, never asking for more than what was certain. Jiho, even without meaning to, had disrupted that balance. And yet, she did not ask him to leave. Jiho made the decision for her. He had lost everything once before: his reputation, his sense of self, the illusion of control. But Sora had built something stable, and he would not be the one to take it from her. So, he walked away. The city continued moving, unchanged by his absence. Sora remained, her days structured by the rhythm of her work, her nights quieter than before. The world whispered its stories, and she let them pass without acknowledgement. In time, the bakery found its footing again. In time, she learned to stop expecting to see him. Jiho spent the months that followed trying to rebuild, not his reputation, but himself. The lessons he had ignored in his pursuit of success became the ones he held on to the most. He learned patience, honesty, and the value of things he had once overlooked. He let go of the past, not to erase it, but to understand it. And when he returned, it was not as the man he had been, nor as the one he had become in the aftermath. It was as if someone had finally learned to stand on his own. The city had changed, but the bakery remained, a quiet presence among the shifting streets. Sora was there, the same but different, carrying the quiet strength that had always been hers. Under the ginkgo tree where their story had first begun, they met again, not as echoes of the past, but as two people who had learned how to find their way forward. Months passed in a steady rhythm, the seasons shifting in quiet increments. Sora continued her work, the bakery thriving in its small, reliable way. The scent of freshly baked bread still filled the air every morning. Customers still came and went, and the world beyond the shop remained as distant as ever. But even as the days repeated themselves, something had changed. Jiho's absence was something she had expected to grow used to, just as she had before. Yet the ghost of him lingered, his presence in the spaces where he had once stood, the memory of his gaze through the window. She told herself she had never truly let him back in, yet the ache of his absence suggested otherwise. Jiho, on the other hand, had spent his time rebuilding. Not his career, not his name, but himself. He had left the world of high finance behind, seeking something quieter, something real. He had taken up work in places that did not care about his past, small, unremarkable jobs that required nothing but his hands and time. There was a strange relief in it, in knowing that no one expected anything of him beyond the task in front of him. Slowly, he learned the value of things he had once dismissed as unimportant. It was on a late autumn evening when he returned, not as a man burdened by scandal, but as someone who had finally found his own footing. The city had changed in small ways, but the bakery remained as he had left it. The scent of bread drifted through the air, and through the window, he saw Sora moving as she always had, steady and sure. This time he stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly, but Sora did not look up immediately. She was busy arranging a tray of freshly baked pastries, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. It wasn't until he spoke that she froze. "You still make those custard buns," Jiho murmured, his voice quiet yet unmistakable. Her breath caught, and for a moment she wondered if she was imagining things. Slowly, she turned to face him. The sight of him standing there so casually as if the last few months had never happened sent a rush of emotions surging through her. Anger, longing, relief. "What are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. Jiho exhaled, his gaze steady. "I wanted to see you." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the quiet hum of the bakery. Sora searched his face, looking for answers he did not yet give. He looked different, not in an obvious way, but there was something in his eyes, a kind of quiet certainty that had not been there before. "You disappeared," she finally said, turning back to her work, as if the conversation did not make her heart race. "I thought it would be better that way," he admitted, stepping closer. "But I was wrong." Her hands stilled, fingers tightening around the edge of the tray. She should have been angry. She should have told him to leave, to walk away like he had before. But the truth was, she had missed him. She had spent too many nights staring at the empty street outside, wondering if he would ever come back. "I don't know what you expect from me, Jiho," she said, her voice softer now. "I don't know if I have anything left to give." Jiho hesitated, then reached for her hand. His touch was tentative, unsure if she would pull away. When she didn't, he tightened his grip, his warmth seeping into her skin. A shiver ran down her spine, and she hated how much she still felt for him. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet his, and what she saw there made her chest tighten. He wasn't just saying the words. He meant them. For the first time in a long while, she let herself believe him. As days passed, Jiho's presence in the bakery became more frequent. He would come in early, helping in small ways, wiping tables, restocking ingredients, making coffee as she prepared the morning's first batch of bread. At first she resisted, telling him she didn't need his help, but he never listened. He just kept showing up, patiently chipping away at the walls she had built around herself. One evening, after closing, they sat together at the counter, the air thick with unspoken words. A light drizzle tapped against the window pane, casting a soft glow inside the shop. Jiho rolled up his sleeves, revealing the faint scars on his forearms, marks of a past he rarely spoke about. His smile faded slightly, and he looked down at his hands. "I used to. For a long time I thought everything I had worked for was wasted, but now," he lifted his gaze to meet hers. "Now I think it led me here." Sora's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to believe him, to trust that this time he wouldn't disappear again. But trust was something she had learned to ration, and she wasn't sure if she had enough left to give. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it, and Jiho's thumb brushed it away gently. She hated how easily he could unravel her, but she couldn't deny how badly she wanted to believe in him, to believe in them. That night, when Jiho walked her home, he didn't just leave her at the door. He lingered, waiting until she unlocked the door and stepped inside. For a moment, she hesitated, turning back to find him still standing there, watching her. She swallowed then before she could stop herself. She took a step forward and wrapped her arms around him. Jiho stiffened in surprise but quickly melted into her embrace, his arms pulling her close. She buried her face in his chest, breathing him in, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingertips. "Stay," she whispered. Jiho cupped her face, tilting it up so she would look at him. The longing in his eyes mirrored her own, and for the first time there was no hesitation between them. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was soft and uncertain, as if testing whether this was real. But as the kiss deepened, as their bodies pressed together in the quiet of the night, Sora knew there was no turning back. Jiho had returned, and this time she wasn't going to let him go. The bakery became their sanctuary. With each passing day, their bond grew stronger, stitched together by stolen glances, quiet conversations, and the warmth of shared moments. Jiho's past still lingered in the background, shadows waiting to resurface. But for now, Sora allowed herself to believe in the fragile hope of what they were building. And as winter approached, blanketing the city in soft snow, she found herself daring to dream again. Not just of the life she had built, but of the love she never thought she would find again. This time she wasn't alone. The first snowfall of the season came quietly, dusting the streets with a soft, delicate white. The world seemed to slow under its weight, as if the past and present were merging into something new. Sora watched the snowflakes fall through the bakery window, steam rising from the cup of tea she held between her hands. Jiho stood beside her, their shoulders nearly touching, but neither moved. There was something peaceful about the silence, something fragile and fleeting, as if acknowledging it too openly might cause it to disappear altogether. But peace never lasted long. The past had a way of creeping back when least expected. It started subtly, an unfamiliar man appearing outside the bakery one evening, his presence lingering longer than that of an ordinary passerby. Then came the whispers, cautious murmurs between customers who recognized Jiho but dared not speak too loudly. Sora had hoped they had left the past behind, but the world was not so forgiving. The past never loosened its grip so easily. Each day, the air inside the bakery felt heavier, the warmth of the ovens failing to chase away the creeping unease. Jiho carried an invisible weight in his eyes, his once easy movements now hesitant, his glances toward the door more frequent. He was bracing for something inevitable, something he had always known would find him. Sora noticed, but she did not push. She simply stayed close, offering him the steady presence that had always been enough before. The tension in the air thickened with each passing day. The man who had lingered outside returned, his watchful gaze never straying too far from Jiho. Sora knew better than to ask, though the worry in Jiho's face told her that whoever it was, they were not merely an observer. The unspoken reality settled between them like an uninvited guest, silent yet impossible to ignore. One night, after closing, Jiho lingered outside the bakery, staring into the darkened street as though waiting for something, or someone. The cold wrapped around him, but he didn't seem to notice. Sora hesitated before stepping out, wrapping her coat tighter around her. The moment she stood beside him, his shoulders tensed, then relaxed, as if the warmth of her presence could momentarily shield him from whatever ghosts haunted him. He turned to her, his gaze searching hers in the dim light. The way the cold air made her cheeks flush, the way her hair slipped from her scarf, the quiet determination in her eyes, it was all painfully familiar, yet different. For a brief moment, he let himself hold on to it. His hands found her waist, drawing her closer, as though grounding himself in the reality that she was here, that this was real. He buried his face against her shoulder, inhaling the quiet scent of flour and sugar, the scent of a life he had desperately tried to carve out for himself. Something in him broke then, the fragile wall he had built to separate himself from her. He didn't want to leave. He didn't want to disappear into the shadows of his past. He didn't want to lose this. Sora's arms wrapped around him, a silent reassurance. Her fingers slipped through his hair, soothing him in the only way she knew how. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't pushing him away. She was holding on. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone had chosen to stay. The next morning, as Sora opened the bakery, she found an envelope slipped beneath the door. Her name was written in neat, unfamiliar script. The weight of it in her hands sent a shiver down her spine. With a sense of unease curling in her stomach, she opened it. Inside was a photograph. Jiho standing outside the bakery, a candid shot taken from a distance. And beneath it, a note written in red ink, "He can't run forever." The paper crinkled in her grip as she stared at the words. A slow, creeping dread settled into her bones. The quiet life they had built, the careful balance of routine and comfort, had been nothing more than an illusion. The past had never let go. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to remind them of its presence. Jiho appeared in the doorway moments later. The moment his eyes fell on the photograph, his expression darkened, his jaw tightening. His fingers curled around the edges of the image, knuckles turning white. They both knew what this meant. The past was knocking, demanding to be acknowledged. But Sora refused to let it dictate their future. The lines between fear and resolve blurred as she made her decision. Jiho had spent too long believing he was meant to be alone, that he did not deserve second chances. But she would not let him carry this burden alone. That night, Jiho did not leave. The weight of the warning settled between them, but they did not speak of it. They sat together in the dim light of the bakery, his fingers entwined with hers as snow continued to fall outside. In the stillness of that moment, there was an unspoken promise. She would not let him disappear, not without a fight. But the past was not finished with them yet. Days later, Sora returned home to find the lock on her apartment door broken. The sight of the splintered wood sent a chill through her spine. Stepping inside, her breath caught at the scene before her. Her belongings scattered across the floor, drawers pulled open, papers tossed aside. Someone had been searching for something. Not just a warning this time, a message. Her pulse pounded as she took an unsteady step forward, the silence of the space feeling heavier than it had ever been. The intrusion felt invasive, a violation of the small sanctuary she had created for herself. The past had not only reached for Jiho, it had now entangled her, dragging her into the storm he had spent years trying to escape. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, knowing there was only one person she could call. Minutes later, Jiho arrived. The darkness in his eyes was sharper now, edged with something dangerous, something protective. He took in the wreckage before pulling her into his arms. The rapid beat of his heart against hers mirrored her own fear. This was no longer just his burden to bear. It had become theirs. Jiho had spent years running, hiding, believing that the past would always have the final say. But as he stood there holding Sora, feeling the way she did not tremble in his embrace, something in him shifted. She was not afraid of his past. She was not walking away. And if she refused to run, then neither would he. The past wanted to drag him back into the darkness, but this time he would fight. If it wanted a message, then he would send one back. The city was eerily silent under the weight of the falling snow, each flake dissolving into the pavement like forgotten whispers. The world had narrowed to this moment, where the past and present collided in a cruel, inevitable fate. Jiho had always known that running was temporary, that the ghosts of his past would eventually catch up to him. But he had allowed himself to dream, just for a while, that he could escape, that he could build something with Sora beyond the shadow of what had once been. The confrontation was no longer a question of if, but when. The man who had been watching finally stepped out of the darkness, his presence a cold, suffocating force. Jiho stood his ground, his body tense, his breath steady despite the rapid beat of his heart. He had spent years preparing for this moment, but the weight of it still pressed down on him like a vice. He had thought of every possibility, every outcome, but none of them had accounted for Sora. She was not supposed to be here. Yet she stood beside him, defiant despite the silent warning in his eyes. He wanted to tell her to run, to disappear, to erase every trace of him from her life. But he knew she wouldn't. She had made her choice long before this night, long before the past came clawing back for him. And now, she was part of it. The exchange was brief, words laced with veiled threats and old grievances. But Jiho understood the unspoken truth beneath them. There was no walking away from this, not this time. He had something they wanted, something he had refused to give them all those years ago. And now, they had come to collect. The first gunshot shattered the silence. Sora gasped as Jiho lurched forward, the sharp sting of pain blooming in his abdomen. His knees threatened to give way, but he gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay upright. He couldn't fall, not yet. His body burned, the warmth of his own blood seeping into his shirt, but his mind remained focused on one thing, Sora. She was frozen, horror widening her eyes, her hands trembling as she reached for him. Jiho wanted to tell her to run, to leave him here, to save herself before it was too late, but no words came. The second shot rang out, and this time it wasn't him. The world slowed to a cruel crawl as Sora staggered back, her fingers pressing against the dark stains spreading across her chest. Jiho's breath caught in his throat, a strangled sound escaping him as she crumpled to the ground. He barely felt the pain in his own body anymore. Everything in him screamed as he dropped beside her, catching her before she could hit the frozen pavement. Her breaths came in short, uneven gasps, her eyes struggling to stay open. His hands pressed against the wound, desperate to stop the bleeding, but it was useless. Blood pooled between his fingers, staining the pure white snow beneath them. His vision blurred, the edges of the world dissolving into a haze of anguish and disbelief. He had promised to protect her. A sob tore through his chest as Sora's fingers weakly reached for his, her grip faint but resolute. She was still trying to comfort him, even as her life slipped away. He wanted to tell her to hold on, that help was coming, that she couldn't leave him like this. But her lips parted, a silent whisper lost to the wind, and he knew. She was slipping away. The men had disappeared into the night, their work done, leaving behind nothing but devastation. Jiho held her close, pressing his forehead against hers as his body trembled with grief. The snow continued to fall around them, as if the heavens themselves were mourning. For the first time, Jiho had nowhere left to run. And as the warmth faded from Sora's body, he realized that without her, there was nothing left to fight for. The bakery remained untouched in the following days, the warmth of the ovens now cold, the scent of sugar and flour replaced by an unbearable emptiness. The world moved on, unaware of the love that had been lost beneath the winter sky. And Jiho, forever marked by the weight of his past, disappeared like a ghost into the night, leaving behind only a memory, one that would forever linger beneath the snow, where love had once lived and died. The past had won,